The US federal government spent $6.75 trillion last year, and as the biggest customer in the world, we are here to talk you through the steps to get a government contract.
With startup founders and small business owners forced to get scrappier, many will actually look towards government work as an additional source of revenue.
Where most people go wrong, though, and what a lot of advice on the internet will tell you, is to head on over to this website called sam.gov and get registered. And what most successful entrepreneurs know is that this actually isn't the best place to start.
Yes, you absolutely need to get registered, but sam.gov, especially for a startup or small business, not the best place to bid. But don't worry about it. We're going to go over exactly where to look if you want to start bidding on government work so that you actually stand a chance of winning as a newcomer in this space. And we are coming from the perspective of two founders who knew nothing about government contracting and then won our first contracts within 6 months of starting to bid.
Yeah, that's
Is
right.
that accurate?
No, I think it was actually within the first 3 months, once we actually knew what we were doing. Because we did submit for a Navy contract and had no chance of winning because we didn't have all the registrations, which we'll go over later. But yeah, once we were properly registered, we won our first contract within 3 months, within 90 days, which still for a startup is a long time.
It is a long time in startup land, but in government contracting land, that is the speed of light.
Yes, it actually doesn't go faster.
No, it's so funny because our first experience was like an ideal timeline, and we were like, this is how this works. And we are smarter now.
We know better today. When most people first decide that they want to go after government work, they usually get directed over to this website called sam.gov, which, fun fact, prior to 2019 was called fedbizops.com and is actually featured in the film War Dogs. That is a real website. They have rebranded to sam.gov. And what people do is they head on over there, they get their business registered, and then they start going through the contracting opportunities. And while this isn't the worst idea, it's not the best place to start if you're completely new. So to win something on sam.gov, you need to get there early. If you can see the bid already posted on the website, you're too late. And you need some past performance or evidence that you've previously done work with the government to really stand a chance of even being considered for the contract. So that's a catch-22, right? Like, how do you show your past work if you can't get past work? And the answer to that is the SBIR and the STTR program.
It's the perfect entry point. It was our entry point into government contracting. So what is the STTR and the SBIR program? How did we get introduced to it as a potential source of funding for our startup?
SBIR and STTR, sometimes called SBIR and STTR, are dedicated small business research and development funding programs with all these different government agencies. So it is specifically designed for US small businesses. So those are businesses with fewer than 500 employees who have no previous government contracting experience. And they're in that R&D phase and they want to build something that maybe the federal government could use. The government calls these companies non-traditional because they are startups and small businesses that don't typically sell to the government. So this is an entire program dedicated just to those sets of companies. And it's a phased program. Once you get in, they start you out with a small contract to prove that you can handle the work. And then as you're successful, they move you up to bigger funding caps, bigger projects with bigger scopes of work. They don't just throw you in the deep end. It's pretty unlikely you're just going to jump in and then within 90 days win a $3 million contract. I'm sure it's happened, but they like to on-ramp you. I know a lot of people think, oh, the government doesn't want what I'm building. The federal government buys absolutely everything, from toilet paper to t-shirts to software to weapons. They buy everything. So odds are there's an agency that would be a good fit for you.
And if you don't see a topic that is directly related to your business, you should start looking for something called an open topic. So for the SBIR and the STTR program, all of the agencies are supposed to have specific topics. So that's where the Department of Energy says, hey, I'm looking for this specific technology, companies who are building innovative things in this space. And you would apply to just that if your company matches that criteria. All of the agencies have specific topics, and all of the agencies are adding open topics. The agency that has the most mature open topic program is Air Force or AFWERX. The AFWERX open topic program basically means there is no requirement to have identified a customer on the Air Force side. You do need to be able to articulate why the product is relevant to the Air Force. So if you are building scheduling software, there's lots of things that get scheduled. Flights get scheduled, maintenance gets scheduled, personnel gets scheduled, right? You would need to be able to communicate, even bidding on an open topic, what the potential relevance is, but you don't have to have an identified customer on the other end. Whereas with all the specific topics, there is someone inside the agency who is looking to buy something specific that they're asking companies to bid on. The open topic is the opposite.
The open topic is an opportunity for the startups and small businesses to pitch the government entity their product. So if they don't have a dedicated topic carved out, but you think you have something that they might want anyway, they just don't know about it yet, you can go through the open topic. And that's effectively what it is. Your proposal is sort of like a startup pitch to them. The point of getting that initial contract is to go find your customer and figure out all of your requirements. And I think that's a good point. All of the agencies now are required to do these open topics. So while AFWERX or the Air Force has the most mature one, they are supposed to be rolling out across all agencies, including ones outside of the Department of Defense.
So, what is the first thing someone needs to do if they want to go after SBIR or STTR funding?
Take a deep breath before you start getting married to a topic or a particular solicitation that you see out there. Put all of that aside and go get your company properly registered. It's not sexy, but you do have to have your business established or you just won't be able to bid. You won't get very far in the process. So you need to have a US entity, specifically an LLC or a C Corp. You need to have your small business concern certificate from the SBA or Small Business Association. You need to have a SAM.gov account. So that's why I said earlier, it actually is okay if the first thing you do is go get registered on SAM.gov because you do need it. You need to have an EIN or a tax identification number for your business. You need to have a cage code, which you get from the Defense Logistics Agency. Now, if you're already like, oh my God, that is too much stuff, we have a whole guide that details this whole process and each of these. It's completely free. We will link it below and it will walk you through all of the registrations that you need to have, how to get them, what emails to send, all of it. And then also in this document, we link all of the different SBIR programs for the different agencies. NASA has their own program, Department of Energy has their own program, Department of Agriculture will have one. All of the different defense agencies, so like Air Force, Navy, Army, Space Force, they all have their own places where their solicitation topics live. There is unfortunately no one consolidated website, which is one of the nice things about sam.gov is that is everything under one roof. But when you go over to SBIR, it's all scattered across these different websites. So we tried to make it easy for you by just at least listing them all out on one page. But yes, definitely check out that document. It is incredibly helpful. Like I said, it's free and we'll link it down below.
And I want to say here what we say to our founder friends when we list all these registrations and we show them this big document and they say, this all looks too hard. You have created your own company. If you can come up with a product, if you can do market research, if you can create a pitch deck, if you can raise VC funding, you can figure out small business government contracting, I promise. We're just here to help. But that is always my counter to people who say that it just sounds too hard. Business is hard. Life is hard. Startup life is extra hard. But you already signed up for that ride. Come on this one too.
SBIR and STTR are not any more difficult than any of the other things you would have had to do to set up your business. For me, it's way easier than raising venture capital and pitching VCs and putting together a deck. I will submit 100 SBIRs before signing up to go do the Sandhill Road Shuffle again. The next thing I guess we need to talk about then is timing. When can people actually apply for these contracts?
You'll love this answer. It depends. So there is no one global schedule that all the programs follow. The con of that is that it's more work for you to go figure out what the agency you're interested in actually does. The pro is that it's unlikely that you're out of the game if you're seeing this at a certain time of year. So it really depends on the agency. For the Department of Defense, at least, it's a little bit more consolidated. New topics will drop the first Wednesday of every single month. NASA does 2 rounds per year, usually January and June. One is more of a traditional SBIR and sitter program, and the second round, which happens in the summer, referred to as Ignite, is still a SBIR and sitter contract, but has a slightly different focus. It's more commercialization oriented. We can go into that at a separate time. The Department of Energy, for example, is also just a couple times a year. And interestingly, with the Department of Energy, you actually have to submit a letter of interest before you can even apply to the solicitation. You can't actually apply to it if you haven't already submitted that. They're the only ones that do that, though, that I'm aware of. The NIH, which is another really popular agency, they have several timelines depending on if it's a specific topic or one of their more rolling pitch processes. So the good news is, you're probably not too late. There is probably an agency that could be a good fit for you that is opening something in the next quarter. It's just a matter of starting to narrow in on which agency is a good fit.
Yes, and NIH is the National Institute of Health.
Yes.
Oh,
NSF operates similarly to NIH, but they're the National Science Foundation.
I was going to ask if you know what the kind of pre-application requirements are for the National Science Foundation, because I know it's a little bit different. They have like a phase 0, right? Where you do have to send in something prior to being asked to bid. I bring
Yeah, it's
this
similar to DOE.
The reason I bring this up is because I just wanted to illustrate the breadth of technology and innovation that the federal government is looking to fund. So we had everything from Department of Energy, we have Department of Agriculture, we have the Department of Defense, which each of them have their own focus areas. We have National Institute of Health, which is of course like medicine and health related sciences. And then NSF is a catch-all. You can do all sorts of things under a National Science Foundation SBIR. The reason I bring that up is because lots of people look at government work and are just like, oh no, I can't. There's nothing for me here. I would be shocked if you get into it and you're actually like, no, there are zero opportunities for me here. I would have questions about your product. And the final kind of note on timing is when you get into all of these schedules and tables and everything, there's a lot of talk of fiscal years or financial years. And the federal government fiscal year starts on October 1st. So we're recording this in July of 2025. And on October 1st of 2025, fiscal year 26 will start. So if you see things that are marked for next year, like the next calendar year, don't dismiss it because it probably is happening sooner than you think. It's probably just indicating that the money to fund that contract is coming from the next fiscal year budget, which starts 3 months early.
Say you have done the registrations, you found an agency that's a good fit, you found an open topic, you've bid and you win. You're not getting paid next month. It's usually at least 6 months from the topic opening, from when you hit submit, to getting your contract in hand. And then, generally speaking, there's at least an initial deliverable you have to hand over before you're going to receive your first portion of that grant or contract. That 3 to 6 months is an optimal period. It can be even longer if there's a government shutdown or a budget drama, which frankly happens almost every fiscal year in the past like 6 years. It's as long as we've been in this cycle. So that's definitely something you need to know.
Yes, exactly. Don't submit a bid or a proposal and then expect to be able to invoice for it next month. Like it's at minimum going to be next quarter if you win. As a founder, you have to make short, medium, and long term bets to grow your business. And you really need to think of any government contract, whether it's through SBIR or something out in the wild on sam.gov. It is a long term game. And if you have investors, they may not be on board with that, just with how long the timelines are. But if it's an option, if you can plan for it, it is, in our opinion, definitely worth it. But yeah, long term game, not a short term win.
So let's say we're willing to play the long term game. Let's talk strategy. How do you find a topic that is worth bidding on?
How we find topics that are a good fit for our company is we go to that list of the different SBIR programs across all of the different agencies. And when new topics drop, we will go to each one and I'll scroll through and check them out. You, of course, can do a bit of a scan and read the headline or read the title and see if that's relevant to your business. And then if you find one where you're like, okay, I think this one, we might be able to provide some value here, what I first check for is if it's crafted or shaped. So the way you can tell if a proposal is crafted or shaped and basically earmarked for a specific company to win is you look for weird jargon or buzzwords or very specific phrases in the requirements section. And you can go Google those terms and see if only one company pops up. That topic is probably not worth your time. But if nothing comes up and it genuinely is an open call for anyone to submit their proposal, then, proceed with caution. But that's one of the first things I check for after we've identified something that is a good fit for our skills.
Yeah, we actually laid out our full bid, no bid strategy. It's kind of like a funnel for us. So maybe of 50 topics that go up, there's eight that sound a little bit interesting. Then it has to go through these checks inside of our team and the kind of is this shaped check that you discussed before we look at what we would actually bid on. If you want to get into that process more specifically, we talk about our process dedicated on the blog. We can link that below.
And just one last little pro tip for this section. You can also go to SBIR.gov and check the previous award data. So that website has this giant database on it, and you can go in and search based on the topic and see if other topics have come up in the past that are very similar to the one you're interested in. There's also a good chance that it's shaped for the company that won previously. If you want to know what goes into an application, check out these videos.
Exactly. And these other resources. And the ebook goes into building a technical volume too.
Up until this point, we have mostly been talking about SBIR or SBIR. What about the partner program STTR or SITR? What is STTR and what is the difference?
STTR is a companion program to SBIR, so it's also run under the SBA, and most agencies that have an SBIR also have an STTR. So the main difference between the two is that for an STTR, you must partner with a research institution, so usually a university or a nonprofit, and they have to do at least 30% of the work. My take on STTRs versus SBIRs is that they are easier to win, but harder to transition. Here's why. For STTRs, because you have to have that relationship with a research institution, so you have to have a professor who's willing to contribute, you have to have a research institution that's willing to sign all this paperwork with you, and it cuts down the pool of available companies that could bid on a specific topic. If there are less people bidding on a given topic, your likelihood of winning can go up. Right? So this is what I mean that they're easier to win is because the times that we have gone after STTRs, we have seen a higher win rate compared to SBIR. And that I think is because it's a much smaller pool of companies that will go after this program. Also, sometimes the funding caps are a little bit lower by agency, which can deter companies and businesses as well. If you want to go after this program, we definitely recommend starting with your alma mater and universities that are local to you. When you reach out, try and be specific about what research the university is already doing and how it could align to your project.
Yes, and we have, I think, some template outreach emails in that free guide I was talking about earlier. It is a little bit strange that with STTR, they expect you to award 30% of the work to a research partner, and then the funding cap is also lower. That is, like Sophia said, one of the things that scares businesses away from bidding on STTR work. The other thing is IP or intellectual property allocation. This scares a lot of companies off, especially if they are IP based. So they're not services businesses. They have a core technology or a core invention that they're building their company around. But for the most part, you don't need to get scared of the IP allocation, especially for phase one. There's usually not much IP to fight over. And then conversely, most universities use the pretty standard IP allocation form, which says if you invented the thing before we met and before we engaged in this contract, you retain the rights to it. The only IP you're fighting over, or you have to decide who owns, is IP generated over the course of the contract. And just because a research institute or a university played a role in developing that IP, it doesn't mean they own 100% of it. They might own a portion of it. And there's lots of different strategies for easily dividing up IP. Again, it's in that document and it's a deep dive we can go into later. But I wouldn't shy away from bidding on an STTR if the topic really closely aligns to your business and if you can lock in a research partner. We've been really lucky. The research partners we've had at universities have all been fantastic and amazing. Like, I would happily work with them on anything.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. They've contributed to the work in a way that we wouldn't have had the same result without them. So it's fair. And yeah, I'm glad you brought up the IP piece because that is what causes kind of the second half of what I said earlier, which is it can make it harder to transition. It just means that you have another factor to consider when you go to sell this product. If there is any shared IP and you owe any licensing back to the university, it's just an extra factor that most small businesses don't have to consider when they're doing go-to-market planning or pricing planning. Doesn't make it impossible, it makes it a little bit more complex. But again, you started a company, you're a founder, your life is already complex. You can
yeah.
handle this.
The IP document you have to go through to complete this step is far easier than any company formation form you had to fill out and file. I promise.
So, if you are thinking about bidding on an SBIR or an STTR, do your homework, read our ebook, pick your battles, and use every free resource out there, including all of ours.
There are a ton of resources out there. There's all of the official stuff on the SBIR.gov website. There's podcasts, YouTube channels, ebooks other than ours. Obviously, we're not the only one out there, but we like to think we are. And we'll, of course, link everything that we mentioned in the description. But remember, this is a long term game. This is a marathon, not a sprint. But if you stick with it, you can get through, you can get your first awards, and then you can look at moving on out of the SBIR program and bidding on the big stuff that's out on sam.gov.
Thanks for listening. And if this was helpful, you can check out our other content where we cover cost volumes and other aspects of bidding on SBIRs and sitters. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah. See you next time. Bye.